Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series where we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Blame Game Precon for Murders at Karlov Manor and its face commander, the Random Pointer of Fingers, Nelly Borca Impulsive Accuser, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $40 price point to an increased budget of $75 after upgrades. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content. And if you really like it, please consider supporting the channel directly either through Buy Me a Coffee or through our Game Nerds affiliate link in the description. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what Precon upgrade we'll be covering next. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Nelly Borca Impulsive Accuser is a 2/4 human detective with vigilance that costs 2 and Boros that has the following 2 abilities. Firstly, whenever she attacks, we suspect target creature, then goad all suspected creatures. And secondly, whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls deals combat damage to one or more of our opponents, we and that creature's controller each draw a card. Breaking down her core stats, Nelly is sporting a mid-weight CMC, a low-power average toughness stat block for her cost, with built-in vigilance to still allow her to block incoming attacks after she swings in, and a pair of abilities focused around incentivizing and/or forcing our opponent's creatures into combat with each other to generate them some value, but generating us significantly more. Taking a closer look at her second ability first, since it more or less lays the foundation for our game plan, it simply serves as a passive source of card advantage for us and our opponents so long as they deal combat damage to a player other than us on their turn. Now, on the face of it, this may not seem that impressive, especially considering this is symmetrical draw, but in practice, since most players won't pass up the opportunity to draw a card for quote-unquote free, this more often than not results in us drawing 3 cards per rotation while our opponents only draw 1 each, essentially making it a free cut-a-deal for us each turn to continually reload our hands with. Also, it should be noted that this ability also provides us with some measure of indirect protection against our opponents attacking us, as even if they do want to crack into us, they'll be passing up on that free card advantage unless they can damage another player as well, which tends to result in at least 1 less creature swinging into us, so they don't miss out on that free value. That said, we won't always be able to rely on our opponents willingly cooperating with us by attacking each other, which is where Nelly's first ability comes into play, providing us with various layers of functionality in this build by A, removing the biggest blocker from the equation on the board she's swinging into to make it easier for her to survive said attack, B, permanently turning that creature into a suspect to enable it to swing in more easily thanks to its newly acquired menace, and allowing other players to more easily swing into its owner since it can no longer block, and C, then goading all suspects in play, which provides the immediate and obvious benefit of forcing that creature to attack a player other than us if able on their controller's next turn, immediately putting the menace we granted them to use and hopefully proccing our card draw, and only gets better as we continually attack with our commander to suspect more and more creatures. So, as we can see based on her abilities, Nelly Borca is obviously a goad/combat control-centric commander, aiming to constantly force or incentivize our opponents to attack each other with creatures we suspect and goad, and then reap the rewards for doing so in the form of card advantage. And out of the gate, this precon has quite a few tools to allow her to do just that, ranging from various ways to goad single or multiple targets to compel attacks, one-sided damage multipliers to rack up more damage onto our opponents as they crash into each other, a decent selection of pillow fort pieces to prevent attacks from coming at us outside of goad and to help us when we get down to the 1v1, and capping off with some new and old absolutely insane sources of value to ensure our hands will be overflowing with cards to keep our game plan rolling. That said, as usual, there's always room for improvement, so the first thing we'll be doing will be aiming to improve the primary forced combat aspect of the deck by adding in even more and/or more powerful sources of goad to keep our opponent's creatures attacking each other and not us while generating us value, and adding in some goad-centric payoffs to generate us even more value, or to have our opponents deal more damage to each other as their creatures are forced to attack. Then, as some more quality of life upgrades to the deck, we'll be adding in a handful of ways to reliably attack in with Nelly and to protect her from removal, thereby ensuring she can get more mileage out of her own suspect and goad effects even on clogged board states, and be able to dodge the inevitable removal that's going to be coming her way once our opponents realize we're drawing 3 cards per rotation, and then spending the remainder of our budget on overhauling the build's lackluster removal suite to help us better deal with threats that we simply can't goad into submission, giving Nelly all the tools that she'll need to rile up the table with wild accusations and then watch the chaos unfold. So let us make our way onto the plane of Ravnica and to Zelzo Base, the headquarters of the Wojek League, the law enforcement division of the Boros Legion. It is here, in one of the countless offices inside this massive complex, that we'll find Nelly, an eager young detective tirelessly and enthusiastically working on cases. Sure, she was just a grunt now, one of thousands of Jeks charged with maintaining peace in Ravnica's many districts, but she was the daughter of the famous Borca, the only Wojek to solve their own murder from beyond the grave, a feat that played no small part in getting Nelly into the Wojeks in the first place, and one that made her strive to live up to her father's legacy. And while she was still young and maybe a bit too eager when coming to conclusions, much to the frustration of her superiors, she would do her best to make her father proud. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's jump straight into the upgrades. So, seeing as this is primarily a combat control deck, the very first thing we'll be doing is adding in some more mass and repeatable sources of goad to the build to keep our opponent's creatures swinging into each other, both to keep our cards flowing and to keep our opponents fighting amongst themselves instead of us. Starting in the former camp, we'll be cutting the aura-focused board wipe Winds of Wrath, since this build already includes some powerful, more on-theme wipes we can make better use of, in favor of Taunt from the Rampart, which provides us with another way to goad the entire board and prevents those creatures from blocking for an entire rotation on top of that, to ensure we can get in for damage reliably while our opponents inflict maximum damage to each other. Darien King of Keldor will be losing his spot, as we won't be taking enough damage between our goad effects and pillow fort pieces to proc his token creation reliably, to Geode Rager, which turns our land drops into a repeatable way to goad a player's entire board, which, considering how much card advantage our commander will be generating us, we should be able to reliably proc every turn, and Mob Verdict, which is simply too unreliable as a board wipe and unnecessary as a draw source in this build, so we'll be replacing it with Kominu Battle Armor, which we can reconfigure onto Nelly to make her even harder to block as a 4/6 with Menace to more reliably proc her effect while goading an opponent's entire board, or we can simply equip to one of the build's naturally evasive creatures to goad more fortified boards. And then, as a pseudo-source of AoE goad, we'll be removing Vow of Duty, which doesn't compel attacks like our other auras, making it less useful to us, and putting in Goblin Spymaster in its place, which pulls double duty here as both a way to give our opponents extra bodies to swing into each other with, and as a way to force them to alpha strike with their entire board every turn, which can admittedly be dangerous for us as those compelled attacks can come our way, but hopefully our pillow fort pieces will keep them directed elsewhere. Now, pivoting into some more targeted sources of goad, we'll be benching Brash Taunter, which fails to make full use of its damage redirection here since our opponents won't be able to reliably attack into us, to make space for Centaur in general, which can easily goad and prevent blocks on up to 3 target creatures as it swings in alongside Nelly and at least one other creature, making it even easier for our commander to swing in safely and being able to do so as soon as it comes down thanks to its built-in haste. Vow of Lightning, which again fails to actually compel attacks, so we'll be replacing it with the Sound of Drums, which goads unlike its predecessor and serves as a damage doubler as the enchanted creature swings in so it can hit even harder, on top of also being recurable from the bin to be used again if the enchanted creature dies off, and the cantrip Wall of Omens, which doesn't really have a place in this build besides being a serviceable blocker, so we'll be trading it out for Grenzo Havoc Razor, which, thanks to his reprint in Commander Masters, is now much more affordable and fits perfectly into this build as a way to turn all our creatures into on-damage goad, or, if our opponent's creatures are already goaded, into theft-themed impulse draw instead. Now, switching gears from creatures that purely inflict goad and onto some creatures that can take advantage of said goad, we'll be cutting the powerful but bit too off-theme Itali Primal Storm in favor of Death's Kiss, which fits in perfectly with the build's already included enemy-only damage doublers to further increase our opponent's damage against each other, and we can later turn into an even bigger beatstick and multi-target goad effect thanks to its monstrosity. Boros Reckoner's OK damage redirection will be replaced with Bothersome Quasit, which prevents all goaded creatures from blocking, not just suspects, to allow both our and our opponent's creatures to reliably get in for damage, on top of tacking on goad to all our non-creature spells to force combat even more. And Prisoner's Dilemma, which, while interesting, at the end of the day is still just a burn spell, so we'll be cutting it in favor of Baloth Baratil Entertainer, who, at base, passively goads all our opponent's power 1 or lower creatures and turns them into ramp for us as they die in combat via his treasure generation, and then when combined with some of our stat improving sources, can goad even more creatures with his mere presence on the battlefield. And then as our final forced combat payoff, we'll be replacing Anya Merciless Angel, who is admittedly a serviceable, if generic, evasive and resilient beatstick, with the more on-theme Boros Angel, Aurelia the Law Above, who takes advantage of all the alpha strikes our opponents will be compelled to perform each turn, as well as our own attacks, by generating us even more card advantage every time at least 3 creatures swing in each turn, and, if 5 or more swing, burning our opponents while healing us on top of that, all while being a decent-sized evasive threat herself to get in for even more damage. And lastly, as some more miscellaneous support pieces to help enable and or benefit from our commander and game plan, we'll be replacing the middling attack incentivizer Frontier Warmonger with Argus Kos, Spirit of Justice, who synergizes very well with Nelly as both another repeatable way to suspect creatures so she can goad them, or as a repeatable way to exile suspects if they become a problem later, and Ancient Stone Idol, which can serve as a massive beatstick that we can get a significant discount on if we or our opponents swing in with enough creatures, but loses out to Life of the Party, which combines very well with the deck's other means to grant our opponents bodies to crack in with, and, if the tokens it makes are turned into suspects, they gain Menace on top of their already built-in First Strike, Trample, and Haste to pile on the damage into our opponents even more reliably. So, with the goad and forced combat portion of our upgrades covered for the most part, let's move on to some new additions more focused around enabling our commander to safely swing in to enable her suspect and goad granting, as well as keeping her alive against any removal that may come her way so we can continue to benefit from her effects for longer. For example, we'll be replacing Savine's Reclamation, which can be used to recur some of our cheaper goad enablers, but that's not really enough to warrant its inclusion, with Whisper Silk Cloak, which makes our commander completely unblockable and protects against targeting to reliably get her in and keep her alive. Feather Radiant Arbiter, who's a fun build around but lacks the spells that target her in this build to make good use of her effect, and Selfless Squire, which generally won't get too much value since attacks will rarely come our way, will be losing their positions to Bastion Protector and Vexilus Praetor, which grant Nelly indestructible and protection from everything respectively so she can reliably swing in, block effectively, and dodge most conventional types of removal on top of that. And lastly, the Planeswalker Elspeth Sun's Champion will be cut, since she's primarily just a board wipe in this build with upside, to make room for Swiftfoot Boots, which may not enable Nelly to swing in safely, but does allow her to swing in as soon as she comes down thanks to granting her haste, and provides protection from targeting as well for its rather cheap cost. Now, with all the primary game plan enabling additions covered, we'll be wrapping up this build's upgrades by making a few quality of life changes to its core stats, consisting of adding in a bit more ramp to help us get to our commander reliably and cast all the spells she'll be drawing for us, and completely overhauling the build's removal package to better deal with our opponent's threats. Starting on the ramp side of things, we'll be swapping out the land-based ramp source Solemn Simulacrum in favor of the Mana Rock Laser Screwdriver, which is cheaper than its predecessor and gives us the option to use it to goad if we have the mana to further enable our primary game plan, and cutting the Egg-like Ransom Note for another Mana Rock in the form of Boros Signet, which may not provide us with the flexibility of the card it replaces, but makes up for it by being a reliable cheap Mana Rock to help us get to our commander in the early game or help us cast more spells later. Then on the removal side of the equation, we'll be trading out the bit to situational Gideon's Sacrifice and Soul Snare for the more reliable Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile, both of which serve as dirt cheap instant speed sources of non-destruction creature removal to deal with almost any type of creature-based threats our opponents throw our way, and a bit too gimmicky removal source Stalking Leonin, the too expensive removal source Angel of the Ruins, and the outright bad land Temple of the False God all being replaced by Stroke of Midnight, Generous Gift, and Chaos Warp, giving us a suite of instant speed ways to deal with any of our opponent's permanent base threats for unparalleled spot removal that other colors wish they had access to. And finally, we'll be using the remainder of our budget to give our land base a slight glow up by terraforming the Bounce Land Boros Garrison and the Land Cycling Land Ash Barrens into the Painland Battlefield Forge and a Checkland Clifftop Retreat, giving us faster and more reliable access to our colors to help improve consistency. So, now that we've covered all 26 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 27 creatures including our commander, 9 instants, 4 sorceries, 12 enchantments, 12 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 23 sources of goad, 3 cards that can compel attacks through other means outside of goad, 3 cards that care about goaded creatures, 7 cards that care about our or our opponent's creatures attacking, 5 cards that provide destruction or targeting protection, and 8 cards that prevent, reduce, or negate attacks and/or damage we would take, leaving us with a very solid combat control build with plenty of ways for us to control when and how our opponent's creatures attack, plenty of payoffs to generate us value and amplify those creatures' lethality as they swing in, a decent number of ways to protect our commander as she swings in and from removal to ensure we get the most value from her goad effect and her passive draw, and even a handful of ways to protect ourselves from non-goaded creatures, or for when we get down to the 1v1 to outlast our final opponent. Then for general deck stats, we have 14 ramp sources, 9 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 3 board wipes. Our draw being slightly below average, but being more than made up for by the huge amount of cards our commander will be drawing for us as our opponents swing into each other, and our removal appearing average, but if we're counting goad as removal, is significantly higher. Looking at our mana curve, we have 4 1-drops, 15 2-drops, 19 3-drops, 12 4-drops, 7 5-drops, 5 6-drops, and 2 7-drops, leaving us with a mid-weight curve that aims to make a beeline to our commander as quickly as possible to get her card-drawing engine going. Then, once she's on board, it's just a matter of keeping our opponents attacking each other to generate us value, either by incentivizing them to do so via the draw Nelly provides, or by forcing them through our myriad of goad effects, all while our commander constantly swings in every turn to keep the amount of suspects on board high. Then from there, we can easily build up our own board with attack-focused payoffs to generate us even more value, or to enable our opponents to finish each other off even faster, until only one opponent remains, who between their already low life totals, our overwhelming amount of cards in hand, and them being unable to attack us thanks to our pillow fort pieces, while simultaneously being unable to block us due to their creatures being suspected, will be easy pickings for Nelly and her fellow rabble rousers. The final price of this build then comes out to be $75.46 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping, and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of most of these cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording, though for a few of the new cards still on pre-sale, pricing on Cool Stuff Inc. was used instead. Now, for side grades, if we want to provide our opponents with more creatures to attack each other with, we can consider replacing Swiftfoot Boots and Bastion Protector with Combat Calligrapher and Ox Drover, which helps us combat more effectively against builds that run few or no creatures, though at the cost of leaving our commander more vulnerable to removal, Or, if we'd rather forgo precision goading in favor of all-out warfare, Argus Cos Spirit of Justice can be traded out for War's Toll, which forces all our opponents to constantly alpha strike in with their entire board if even one of their creatures is goaded, and that's on top of forcing them to tap their entire mana base if they wish to cast any spells, though be warned that those creatures will certainly be coming our way if we don't have enough goad or pillow fort pieces in play. Then for upgrades, honestly, apart from generic suggestions like building up our land base with Bond, Shock, and Fetch lands to help speed it up, or adding in Jeweled Lotus to get our commander out as fast as we regret spending almost $100 on a piece of cardboard, there aren't many legitimate upgrades I can really suggest. This precon already has most of the tools it would need to be effective out of the box, and with the extra $35 worth of upgrades we added, we've more or less given it all the tools it would need to be as effective as possible. That said, we can always cut Otherworldly Escort for some more efficient removal if we really want to, but me personally being a big fan of Yu Yu Hakusho and this being a pretty clear reference to Yusuke convinced me to keep it against my better judgment. Damn you, amazing 90s anime! Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. So, now that we've covered the Blame Game precon, it's time for us to dive into the Deep Clue Sea precon, along with its face commander, the legally not a merfolk, Morshka Undersea Sleuth, so look forward to a draw-focused clue build featuring her coming soon. And lastly, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel can't continue to grow without your support. And if you're feeling particularly generous, feel free to keep me caffeinated via buying me a coffee at the link in the description, or alternatively, use our Game Nerds affiliate link in the description if you're looking to purchase sealed MTG product, accessories, board games, or any of their other wide selection of products at low prices that include free shipping for orders over $75, and a rewards program that builds up store credit over time as you make your purchases. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.